I had run into in the past where people maybe recently out of the military struggled in the corporate world because they were so used to that rank approach that when it was almost like they struggled to get their mind around the what do you mean you're not going to do it, or I didn't, almost like I didn't know that was an option to say no, I didn't feel like doing that kind of thing. Have you seen that? And then what advice would you have for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that people understand that your rank honestly doesn't matter a whole bunch once you get out of the military. Not that there's not perks to having it, not that there's not certain doors that may or may not open, but once you take whatever that position is, nobody cares. Nobody that works for me cares that I used to be a warrant officer, and nobody's going to do what I asked them to do because I was a warrant officer. It's just that's not how industry works, and there are definitely some folks that struggle. And yeah, a lot of times what you're going to find from what I've seen, those people kind of quickly fizzle out in a lot of the positions that they're in because most likely you're a good example is I have a friend of mine retired as a colonel out of the Army. His boss is a 26-year-old Harvard grad, right? Like, they have different experiences, and that kid really doesn't necessarily care that he used to be a colonel.
Sure.
That was certainly part of the reason this gentleman got hired in the sense because of the role he was filling. But at the end of the day, his rank doesn't have anything to do with his success. And you really got to kind of leave it at the door. And, you're going to work for people that were junior to you. And to a certain extent, some of the skills that make you really good at industry could be a detriment to your success in the military and vice versa. And kind of understanding what those are and what those strengths and weaknesses when it comes to those specific areas is a big deal.
Have you ever run into a situation where you'd be working with another person, sort of from the military, you're both in corporate at this point, but they were like, a corporal or like an E4 or E6 or something, and now they're your boss? And does that make that even harder, or no, it's the same thing as a Harvard grad versus or anything else?
So up till now, for what it's worth, it's been the opposite way for me. I have people that I used to work for who now work for me today.
Yeah. Got it. So you're the other guy in that equation.
Yeah, I've been the other way up to this point. I think it depends on the individual, right?
Sure.
I think, again, Tim knew me on active duty. I never cared about my rank, in large part because of the organizations that shaped my kind of who I am the most. Your success in that organization had nothing to do with your rank, right? They put the best person in the best job, and we worked out the administrative side of it behind the scenes as appropriate, right? But when I was the senior engineer at JSOC, right, I was an E5 and an E6, and I was the senior engineer not because of my rank, because I was the most qualified at the time to do that. And I try to bring that same kind of concept to at least my teams, where I am hiring a type of individual over a person with a certain rank or a person with a certain set of qualifications. Because I will tell you right now, I would be the first one to hire. I would hire some E5 if they were the right person to do the role. And I don't really care if they're an E5 or not. Same thing, I'll hire an 06, and I don't really care because it's just, at the end of the day, your rank today in this world isn't as important. Who you are matters a lot more.
Yeah. So a little bit of an aside here, because I didn't think about this until you started talking about it, because you and Tim served together. And so can you talk a little bit about, sort of that service and maybe your guys' relationship a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do we have to?
Yeah, I was gonna say, do it really? So Tim and I were obviously in the Army together, and I'm sure Tim shared some of his stories at least over the years, but we were actually assigned at the 86th Signal Battalion together, I think from probably about 2008 to 2010. No, 2010 to 2012.
Yeah.
Somewhere around there.
2010. Yep.
And Tim and I previously to that assignment had a very kind of different career path than what most of the people around us had. both kind of growing up in different areas. But, you know, we kind of came together at the time. I was working in the engineering office. Tim, I don't even know what your original job was supposed to be, but Tim ended up working on the ops floor for a while. And we had some communication challenges. Yeah, we had some communication challenges with, we were growing super fast, and we went from having about 35 nodes in the network to about 300 nodes in the network over a span of about 90 days. And I got a little frustrated with kind of how things were being elevated and things were kind of dying on a vine when there were network problems. You know, like as an example, the G3 office or the S3 office at the time and the S6 office would kind of throw problems back and forth, and nobody would really own them. So I walked over to Paul Kraft, who was at the time now General Kraft, was our commander, and I said, "Hey, sir, we got to fix this. I'm an idiot, so I'll take this on one condition: you let me kind of handpick my team." And Tim and I had been working together, and like I said, I was more looking for a type of person than the right skill set necessarily. I needed a group of people that when we said this is our problem, you know, we weren't giving that problem back to anybody. We understood that when it got to us, it had to be us to solve it. And Tim fit that build. You know him, you know his personality. He fit the build. We had a couple other really good people on the team, a gentleman named Johnny Warren that we stole over as well. And you know, we kind of made our own job. And you know, one of the things that I give Tim and Johnny Warren and those guys all the credit to, and you know, Tim made a joke about it yesterday. It was not the easiest job we've ever had by far. There was a lot of really long, painful hours, and a lot of learning on the fly and getting punched in the face by other organizations on a regular basis. But in a lot of ways, it was the three of us really were responsible for the entire tactical network through the surge through Kandahar. And the success from a comm standpoint of what we were able to do in large part is because of the work that Tim and Johnny did in support of the task force at the time, for sure.
Wow, that's cool.
Kind of going back to just a few chapters ago when we were talking about the, bringing in that IT manager. Maice, you mentioned that, or Michael, you mentioned that, are coming in. You have no idea what you're bringing into the organization, into the new company. You just have to deal with it. You can't fire them. So I distinctly remember, and this was quite a few times, of being in the operations center and watching these very old and salty warrant officers come in seeking your advice from different organizations. I mean, these guys had to have combat boots that were older than you. That's how old these guys were. And they would essentially come in and say, "Hey, we have problems, and we heard you're really good at solving problems. Can you help us out, Maice?" And I mean, that kind of goes back to your statement about it really didn't matter as far as your rank at the time you were staff sergeant. Is more so they were looking for that skill set, looking for that. But the other thing that comes to mind is you mentioned we don't give back these problems, right? And we never did. I think our slogan at the time was "the buck stops here," is what we ended up calling ourselves, or what we we crescendo down the hallway. And then I mean, that the element there that resonates the most is the anxiety of knowing that a lot of the communications packages that we had on the ground that we had to support on the back end, we had to make sure the infrastructure was in place to allow for digital voice and data, was those 9-line medevacs, right? Knowing that some of those sites are out there, that their dependency on comms being up, TDMA, FDMA, was pointed back to, or was huge part of, is you've got to have this up, and it's got to be up 24/7. There's no downtime. And the reason why is at any given time, we've got to call in a 9-line medevac. We've got to get a bird in. We've got to get a casualty out and so forth. So that right there, that is what sits with me still today, right? That little, I mean, that's so relatable, man.
People used to ask all the time, like, how did you work all the long hours? How did you deal with all the stress? How did you deal with the anxiety? And I think, as at least as an individual, it's really important to understand why you do what you do for a living. And there's a really great book out there called Know Your Why. If you've never read it, I highly recommend it. It's a great book for anybody to read. But for me at least, the way that I was always able to navigate a lot of that is, it was really simple to me. At the end of the day, on the other end of that phone, on the other end of that SATCOM link, on the other end of whatever we were working on at that day, is somebody's wife, somebody's husband, somebody's children, someone's sibling, a brother or sister, right? But they are there with you in Afghanistan or Iraq or any of the appropriate places at the time. But they're away from their family too. And I always took it a little bit as a personal kind of thing that I was willing to carry with me, is that, part of what my job really was over there wasn't to provide, the best voice call available, right? The reality of our job over there was to make sure that when it was the most important call, it went through. And as Tim mentioned, sometimes that important call is a medevac. The difference between seconds mean lives in those scenarios. And some people can carry that and kind of be very aware of that and make it very personal. That worked really well for me. And some people need to kind of avoid it at the same time. But at least for me, I kind of went to work every day knowing that what we did mattered, and people's well-being depended on us doing our job and not handing those problems back.
Wow. Well, I wish that's amazing. I kind of wish we had ended with that topic. But I do want to ask you a little bit now, sort of again, changing gears a little bit. Talk about your role as CTO. What is it to be a CTO in the corporate world? I think a lot of people, there's CTO, there's CIO. Well, how are they different? What are they different? That sort of thing. I'd love to understand that a little bit better.
Yeah, so I think I crack jokes all the time. If you ask 10 CTOs what they do for a living, they're probably going to tell you 10 different things. It is definitely, I feel, one of the least defined kind of executive titles that are out there. But I think generally speaking, the type of company you're in will certainly influence the role that you play within that company. But I think generally speaking, as the CTO, your primary function is to kind of influence and drive technology insertion into the company that's in line with the CEO's essential goals, right? Which in most cases is to grow, create more revenue, create more profit. So for me, at least strategically, it falls on me to make sure that whatever technologies we're bringing in to help drive those two efforts, and whatever investments we're making in actually come back with some type of profitability. Now, when you're in the CTO role, unquestionably, though, depending on the type of company, is very different. As an example, the CTO of our parent company does a very different job than what I do as the CTO of a product company. So in my world, I am responsible in large part for a lot of our technical strategy and kind of forward thinking, kind of thinking through our product development and what's the life of our products over the next 3 to 5 years. And I also spend a good portion of my time out being an evangelist for technology, doing kind of public speaking engagements similar to what we're doing right now, talking about whatever's appropriate for that organization, and really trying to kind of establish myself as well as our company as kind of a thought leader in the technology space that we operate in, right? Because to a certain extent, for us and what we build, when people think of those keywords, when somebody thinks of commercial solutions for classified, which is what we specialize in, we want people to think about us first. And that is a good portion that I play, our team plays. And the other great thing about being the CTO, and one of the things that I realized I enjoyed a lot more than I probably thought I would have, especially earlier in my career, is, I probably only spend a quarter of my time, maybe a third of my time doing technology, like pure technology, right? Like nerding out, doing the things that, I'm loving to do. But I find now I spend a lot of time also working with, as an example, our marketing teams, right? And making sure kind of messaging and thinking through corporate messaging and what we're saying to people, right? I spend a lot of my time, like I said, doing public speaking engagements that aren't necessarily always technical. Some of them are a lot like we've talked about today, about the transition and all these various things. That about 2/3 of my time is actually on things that aren't kind of traditional kind of technology topics. And I thought in my younger years, I would have hated that portion of it. What I found as I've gotten older, I actually really kind of enjoy that side of it. I enjoy being out with customers and being out with other, fellow nerds and sitting down and, nerding out just as much as I really enjoy sitting down and writing a blog post that takes a really technical kind of topic and makes it consumable by everybody. So, but that's kind of my day to day. It's at a high level.
And if somebody was interested in pursuing that, like what would you, almost like first principles, what do they, how do you get there, or how do they maybe at least start thinking about, maybe I'd like to go that direction? Because CTO and CIO really feel very different to me. And I think a lot of the time people hear, executive, they hear C-suite, and they just go, oh, well, I want to do that. And they don't really stop and think about, well, your career's could take two very different paths here. And you really kind of want to be thinking about that earlier on, as opposed to trying to, sort of just quote unquote executive. So how might they think about that?
Yeah. I mean, again, like CTO is interesting because depending on the company and where it's at in its path, the CTO at a startup company may also be the lead developer and the lead, technical salesperson as well. If you're employee number 3, you're doing a lot of things, as an example, So, I think the first piece of it is understand that no matter where you're at, where the company you're going to work for is at in their process. If you're going to be the CTO of that company, you're going to do a lot more than technology. And you need to spend some time. And the thing that I wish I would have done more of before I jumped into these roles was I needed to spend time understanding business as well, right? I needed to spend some time learning about how the financials work and accounting works, and what's the difference between EBITDA and gross profit, as an example. These are all things that I learned, kind of on the fly, that my life would have been a lot easier had I understood beforehand. But also understanding things like how marketing works and where you can leverage things like social media and kind of all of those various things, and understanding you're not going to be an expert in anything you ever do again. Right. And what I mean by that is, look, everybody on my technical team nowadays is significantly more technical than I am. And it's not even close. I'm not going to be the financial expert. I'm not going to be the sales expert. I'm not going to be the marketing and partners and channels expert. It's my job, though, to be the expert on taking whatever technology we're going to use and making sure it meets the business objectives established by the CEO.
Okay. That's interesting. And I totally agree. I think the business side of business, a lot of the time we almost turn a blind eye to it until you get to a point where people are sort of looking at you going, why don't you know this? And it can be frustrating because it's how did you get to director at this company, and you don't even understand how to, kind of how to leverage an accounting spreadsheet, or how to potentially, financially propose a project or any of those things. And I've always said, if the language of business is numbers, it's dollars and cents, that's how they talk. When you talk to a quote unquote business person, a CEO, those people talk in that language. And we need to be able to, as IT professionals, be able to have that, we need to be able to understand and have that language, learn that language ourselves.
Yeah, Jerry, and I think one of the other things too is you've got to get really comfortable with being uncomfortable as well. Because, like I said, when you're not the expert, you're going to be in these meetings. You're going to realize that really quickly that these people know a lot more about their expertise than you do, and you can kind of go one of two routes, right? You can kind of sit there and kind of pretend like you know everything, or you can stop and ask questions. And the advice I have for anybody that's kind of going down this path is stop and ask those questions, because they're going to change the way you make decisions moving forward.
Man, that's great advice. And you're 100% right. You got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. And it kind of goes back to that we talked about earlier of when we like to be, a lot of the time, IT people want to be that smartest person in the room. And then you get in a room where they're not even talking a language that you understand. And it starts to really mess with your brain. And so, the flip side of it is now you start trying to interject in weird ways that don't make any sense to the conversation, to show that you still are smart, and it just ends poorly. So, yeah, that's really,
Yeah, and
really great advice.
Yeah, and I think the other piece of advice with regards to doing this job is, and I kind of referenced it a little bit, but it's definitely make sure you hire people to make sure you hire people that are better than you to do the things that you're not good at.
That's great.
So like in my case, I know that I need to have a really good VP of product development because I'm not a developer by trade. And I need that gentleman in my scenario now to be much better at his job as a developer than I am. Because if I'm the best developer in the room, our products are going to have some real problems. So there's a little, being able to navigate in that space too is probably the other thing I tell time and get used to it because it's a reality.
That's
Maice,
that's cool. Oh.
Yeah, Maice, from someone who I've known you as long as I have, you were that individual contributor, right? But you were that go-to guy, right? During that time, smart guy, brilliant guy. Everybody came to you with their problems to allow you to solve them for them or point them in the right direction. To now where you're at today, that process, that journey of where you were, which was great, that individual contributor, rockstar engineer, to now this, what I would say, a humble and very knowledgeable CTO that has great perspective. There's a lot of people that want to get where you're at, and they struggle kind of relinquishing that ego and that, I have to be right and I want to be right. And they are very smart like yourself. So any advice for those who are on that track, they want to get into an executive position like yourself, but at the same time, they're having a hard time really letting go of that. I may be the smartest person in the room, and I have a problem with not trying to remind people of that.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I think the first thing, and it's kind of an unfair statement when I say this, but I think that I think if people want to do a job, they'll do it. And what I mean by that is, I think in order to transition from being kind of that senior engineer, kind of enterprise architect type individual to being an executive is, you have to understand you have to change. Because every minute you're in the weeds doing something, there's some strategic piece of the company that you should be working on that has long-term effects on the success or failure of that company, much greater than whatever that very tactical kind of issue is. And for the people that want to transition, it comes with the commitment of of making that transition and committing to it up front and saying, hey, look, I have to let go of this. And it's going to be hard. And I'll be the first one to tell you, there's probably 2 days a year where I get frustrated and I'm like, you know what, I'll get on the keyboard and I'll do it. Right. And I think I've gotten better every year, maybe at not doing that as often. But I still certainly have that piece to it. But I think when I think when you're making that transition and you're choosing to make that transition, the commitment that you're making is you're committing to think differently, and think through a different lens. And it's going to be hard, and it's going to seem almost detrimental at first. It's going to seem like things don't get solved as quickly. It's going to seem like problems may linger just a little bit longer. But you have to be able to ask yourself, like, did that extra 10 minutes it took for Tim to solve that problem, did it actually make any difference to the kind of the goals of the company as a whole? And if the answer is that 10 minutes really didn't matter other than you just wanted it done 10 minutes faster, then there was no harm done by delegating that task. And the more you think about that business outcomes approach, the more you understand what impacts that and what doesn't. and you become more comfortable, obviously, with that kind of that delegation and that change of mindset as you kind of progress.
Love it.
Yeah, that's man. I tell you what, I am sad to say that we're out of time here, and I'm hoping that maybe at some point Tim and myself and you, Michael, can get together for lunch. Probably not in Afghanistan, but maybe
I'm okay
maybe
with that too.
maybe Florida, or wherever. I think that would be so great. You have been so insightful. I really appreciate it. I do want to say thank you very much to Archon for letting you be on the podcast with us. And thank you very much, Michael, for your time, for your service. I want to say thank you to my fellow misfit, Tim Stevens. My name's Jerry Black. Have a great day.